want to invite you to open up your Bible to the book of John. New chapter today. We're in chapter 11. We finally got through John chapter 10, and we learned a lot from it. But in chapter 11, we have this wonderful story that most of us are familiar with. It is this resurrection of Lazarus. Pretty familiar. Maybe you've heard about it in Sunday school. Maybe you grew up around church and you're aware of Jesus resurrecting Lazarus. And you may have a certain preconception of this. Was it real? Was it fake? Is this a parable? Is this hyperbole? Is this just a metaphor? What is this story, and what do we do with it if we're Christian? There is an obvious distinction in the world when they look at stories like this, and they look at Jesus, and again, I always tell you this, come Christmas time, come Easter time, you'll even see it in Time magazine, that Time magazine or People magazine, or even the History Channel magazine will come up with a story on the life of Jesus, and they affirm His goodness and what He was able to do in life, and they usually highlight the social aspect of Jesus Christ. But what do you do with this story? What do you do with Jesus Christ resurrecting the dead? And if you're like many of the people outside of the church, you'll kind of just relegate it to a simple story, nothing more, nothing less. It was just a wonderful depiction of a man who could metaphorically give people life and make them feel good about themselves. But this is no miracle, this is no power, and this is definitely not a man who can resurrect the dead. So at the beginning of our study in John, we presented a life-altering question to you. Something that we've been hearing consistently throughout the entire gospel. This question has some huge gravitational implications for your life in this world and in the life to come. If there is a heaven and if there is a hell, your answer to this question will determine which direction you go. Now, again, that presupposes you believe in such eternity. There is one, the Bible presents one in heaven, and there is an eternity separated from God in hell. Now, again, people outside of the church may look at us and say, do you honestly believe that? Like, don't you just think that once you die and that's it? The Bible presents a different picture. And the way you answer this question, according to a biblical authority and to our biblical understanding, will lead you in either or direction. Remember, there's only two ways in this world. So what's the question? The question has often been presented here as this: who do you say Jesus is? That is the question. And that is my question to you once more this Sunday. Who do you say Jesus is? And so up until this point in the gospel, Jesus has been working and demonstrating irrefutable signs of His divinity and His messiahship. From His turning the water into wine, to actually walking on water, to healing a man born blind, and now gracefully and mercifully and powerfully demonstrating His authority over life and death in the person of Lazarus. This is what Jesus has been doing up until this point in John's gospel. At this powerful climactic demonstration, as if the rest of the miracles that Jesus did in His life weren't enough, He will also speak on His life and the bread that He had provided and the drink that He had provided, and give us the notion and understanding of why it is true bread, true drink, and true life. Because He is able to raise the dead. Up until this point, again, these powerful examples of Jesus' ministry is an accomplishment of the things that only God could do. Proving, again, why Jesus isn't just a man, or as History magazine would show, just a good man. He is God. As Jesus said in chapter 10, at the end of chapter 10, the Father is in me and I am the Father. Jesus taught who He was. He didn't only show it. He demonstrated His divinity by teaching all of this with the implications of all of those who stood around Him, implying that Jesus was more than simply a man. Think about this. The people that witnessed His miracles time and time again, the people that heard His message time and time again, what were they going to do with this figure? What were they going to do with Jesus? Why did He demonstrate this? Why did He teach this way? Well, because Jesus was also a human being. We can't fail to just understand Jesus as a divine being. We must also look at His humanity. And chapter 11 will be a climactic finish to His ministry, not only in power, but also in demonstration of His human side, His human nature coming to reach people like us. John, in his gospel, then highlights this human side of Jesus. Verse 33 will say that the Spirit, that He was moved in His Spirit and greatly troubled. And then in the longest verse of the Bible, or in one of the longest verses of the Bible, look with me in verse 35. What does it say? Jesus wept. If you haven't memorized John 11:35, if you don't know any other verse in the Bible, you should know that verse. Simple, couple of words, but we see again the human side of Jesus. Jesus wept. And in the introductory verses that we also read that Lazarus, as verse 3 says, was the one that Jesus loved. So this humanity of Jesus is on display. What Jesus will do in the life of Lazarus will prove God's power, but will also show His human nature on display. It will demonstrate that He is one with God and doesn't have a separate agenda than God, for He is one with the Father and He loves to do the Father's work. The resurrection of Lazarus will demonstrate that Jesus loves to raise people from the dead. Now, this will also propel us to a future where Jesus will raise a lot of people from the dead. Now, not only physically, or not physically per se, but He raises them spiritually. Jesus is powerful enough to raise the dead physically, but He is even more powerful to make people like Lazarus, people like you, and people like me actually have a spiritual resurrection. We'll read that later in verse 25 when Jesus says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. If He's powerful enough to raise Lazarus, what makes you think He's not powerful enough to wash away your sin? What makes you think He can't erase your past? What makes you think He can't eliminate your mistakes? What makes you think that you aren't worthy enough for heaven? And what makes you think that He doesn't have the power to make a new creation in you? It is Jesus that could do this, and only Him, because He is God. He can make you justified before God, dress you in righteousness, impute His goodness over you, and now you can stand forgiven and accepted by God because of what Jesus could do in your life. This is why the human aspect of Jesus is so important here, because He's one with God and so also would love to resurrect His people to life. What makes you think that Jesus can't stand before your death spiritual life and bring you to life? It's always the common response: come to church, come to Christ, I'm not good enough. If you could only see my past and the things that I've done in the past, what makes you think God can't resurrect you through the life of Jesus Christ? He can definitely move the stone away from Lazarus' tomb. He will move it away from your spiritual death and make you rise. But only He can. As we'll see, Lazarus couldn't resurrect himself. Jesus, on this part, He will also demonstrate that He does some of His best works inside of tombs. Chapter 11 then will mark this climactic ministry of Jesus' signs. Remember, the Gospel of John is cut up in two pieces. The first 12 chapters, or the ending up until chapter 11, marks the ending of Jesus' human ministry. His signs, His works that He's been doing. From 12 and on, we're going to see the entire response of the Jews against Jesus, and it'll go into that particular moment when Jesus hangs on the cross. After chapter 11, Jesus will not do another miracle in the midst of the people. It was His public ministry that was put on display, and it ends with a bang. It ends with a remarkable empty tomb, which also will remind us or point us forward to the future empty tomb. But in this case, that tomb will remain empty. So, let's look at this chapter, and let's look at this very familiar story, and let's take out some wonderful truths from it. So I'll explain briefly in between the sections that we will read, and then we'll bring it to a conclusion with two verses at the end of this section that really are powerful with what Jesus says. So go with me to chapter 11, and let's read up until verse 15. I'm going to read chapter 11, verse 1 through 15, just so we could kind of get started. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and helped His feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent Him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, He said, this illness does not lead to death. It is the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when He heard that Lazarus was ill, He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, He said to His disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to Him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you are going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because his light is not in him. After saying these things, He said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to Him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of this death, but they thought that He meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. We'll stop there. At this introductory section, we have some characters that I want to highlight in this story. You read Lazarus, we have Mary, we have Martha, and we also have some disciples. And I didn't read the verse 16 and 17 with this particular disciple, Thomas, that we'll get to, but we have these characters that were part of Jesus' ministry. And it was a relational ministry that Jesus had with such people. That's why the human side of Jesus is so important in this story. Like the man born blind, Jesus could have easily resurrected someone who was not even close in relationship with Him. But in this case, this gospel shows us that Jesus had this relational circle, ultimately proving that Jesus cares for His own and works in their favor for those He loves. So, the family that was dear to Jesus, as we are presented in chapter 11, was Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And verse 2 gives us a kind of a side note that describes really something that happens in chapter 12. But this is just John assuming that his readers know what happened in chapter 12. So that's why chronologically it might knock you, if you read chapter 12, you'll be like, wait, wasn't Mary, He said it in chapter 11. Now we get it in chapter 12, the actual act of Mary blessing Jesus with the ointment on his feet. But this is just something that John would assume his readers already knew. So, in verse 3, we have again the love of Lazarus. Jesus loved Lazarus. And it is affirmed, if you go all the way down to verse 36, look what the Jews said. See how he loved him? So when Jesus was actually there at the tomb, even the Jews around him knew how much Jesus loved this man. In verse 5, we get the love that Jesus has for Martha and her sister, and once more, Lazarus. And it's interesting here that the Greek order of words, agape, or the famous love word in Greek, it's put right at the beginning of verse 5, which is an emphasis. It is that he really loved this family. And we'll see why in a bit. But here again, we have Jesus loving, Jesus caring, and Jesus feeling, just to eliminate any doubt that Jesus was truly human and truly divine. We also have characters like the disciples that are present, right? The disciples are always there. And the disciples, as verse 11 shows, were also friends of Lazarus. This proves that this relational ministry was working together. There was a group of people. There was relationship. There was a relational aspect to Jesus' ministry. Jesus didn't just function alone. Jesus didn't just demand from his disciples. He had a relationship with them. And let's read verse 16 and 17. So Thomas called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go, that we may die with him." Now this is an interesting mention of Thomas. And as you know who Thomas is, he is usually associated later on in chapter 20 with what? Doubting Thomas, right? The disciple that doubts Jesus actually resurrected from the grave. It's interesting that I think John is highlighting a disciple that is like us, that can have faith at the very beginning. Yeah, we could do this. I mean, you see him here with all this energy, but when it comes down to proving his faith, he's really like, I don't know, up until Jesus shows who he really is when he walks through the wall and shows his scars in chapter 20. Ironically, Thomas will see Jesus resurrect Lazarus, but he won't believe that Jesus actually resurrected himself. So this begs the question, why wouldn't Lazarus believe that why wouldn't Thomas believe that the one who resurrected Lazarus wouldn't believe Jesus could resurrect himself? Again, why does John say this? It could be to highlight the human nature of disciples. Those who follow Jesus, see his ministry up close, but are very human. Oftentimes we look at great people in the Bible, great people of God throughout all church history, and we can see the greatness that they had throughout even the reformers in the 16th century, all the way up through the Puritans in the 17th century, and the great preachers of the 18th century. And we look at their wonderful lives, but we also see that their feet were made of clay, that they had huge flaws with them. Recently, one of the most beloved men in apologetics in the Christian world, Rabbi Zacharias, everyone loved him. Everyone respected him. And at the end of his life, we found out some terrible things about him. Why is this helpful for us? Because we're all human beings. And we all have flaws that only Jesus could take away. And as Thomas will at first energetically want to go with Jesus, and he says, let's die with Jesus here. He's like kind of showing his masculinity, right? His desire to go with his master and say, let's do this. I'm going to throw down with you, Jesus. I'll be there with you. I got your back. But a couple chapters later, he's the one that's doubting himself. This is helpful for us, once more, Jesus deals with people just like us all throughout his ministry. Now, verse 1 through 15 will also highlight not only characters of the story, but it will also highlight the issue. What's the problem going on in chapter 11? Well, we'll get some notion of this between the first 15 verses. I also want you to highlight verse 17, verse 21, verse 32, and verse 39. They will all be part of this problem that is happening in chapter 11. And as you may already know the problem, what is the problem? In verse 3, we have Lazarus sick. He is said to be ill. And then to amplify this issue, verse 6 tells us that Jesus waited for 2 days, which would kind of contradict his love, right? Doesn't he love him? Why would he wait 2 days to actually go where he was? Now, this was like about a 2-day journey where Jesus was. If you read in chapter 10, if you remember the ending of chapter 10, he was across in the Jordan where John the Baptist would baptize. So it would have taken him relatively 2 days to get there. So why prolong the situation? Once more, we're going to show why Jesus does what he does for the sake of people. And so in this time frame, in this 2-day delay, he's kind of showing us that no one can manipulate him or move him. Jesus moves in God's perfect timing. This is what Jesus does. He will not be manipulated by anyone else. And most importantly, it's a teaching moment. His delay will be a teaching moment for those closest to him. Look at what verse 15 says again. And for your sake, he's talking to his disciples, I'm glad that I was not there, so that what? You may believe. He's talking to his disciples, and he has delayed the situation. At this point, they are aware, Jesus already knows that Lazarus is dead, and he lets his disciples know, I'm glad that we weren't even there, and I'm glad that you weren't there, because what you will see will help your faith, will cause you to believe. You look at that again, you say, so that you may believe. Didn't his disciples already know? Didn't his disciples already believe? Isn't that the whole point of being a disciple, that you actually believe Jesus? Well, Jesus was there to strengthen their faith. Again, Jesus was going to be with them for a little while longer, and they will confront persecution in the coming years. Jesus is there to help them with their faith. Don't ever doubt that Jesus walks with you in your daily life. Don't ever have any doubt that Jesus actually cares about your faith. That Jesus isn't this deistic God that just looks at you and sees all your mistakes and says, all right, let me see how good you could do. And, you failed again. No, Jesus is there every step of the way. That's why we learned in chapter 10, he is the good pastor, the good shepherd that walks with his sheep. And so what we read between verses 11 through 14 then is that Lazarus is not asleep, but he is actually dead. So from the illness, he is now officially dead. And in verse 21, if you read that with me, look what Martha says. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So even Martha understands that if Jesus would have arrived sooner, Jesus would have healed. Martha had faith. Martha had faith that Jesus was the only one that could heal her brother. That's why we read in the first opening verses that they actually called for Jesus. Tell Jesus that the one he loves is sick. In verse 32, we have the sister Mary responding in the exact same way. It was both their reactions that primarily came from faith. They knew Jesus could heal, but they were yet aware that Jesus could actually raise somebody from the dead. And so in this, their faith was being tested. Here we have, at the beginning, we have one of the characters' faith being tested, which is Thomas. And then it's a general test of faith with the disciples. And now with the people that Jesus loves, He is also testing their faith at the very beginning. They believed, but did they believe enough? And so, in verse 17, we have the concept of time. If you go back to verse 17, read that with me. Now when Jesus came, He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. So at this point, we get the emphatic notion that Lazarus was not maybe dead, but that he was dead. He was really dead. After 4 days, there is no mistake that Lazarus was actually dead. Martha, if you read what Martha says in verse 39, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to Him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days." That is the response, again, of the woman that had faith, right? Didn't she believe that Jesus could heal him? Well, we see in verse 39 that Martha is still kind of like, I don't know. Jesus, like, don't you know that when we roll the stone away, since the dude is dead, you're not even going to be able to walk in there. You're not even going to be able to work your stuff. The guy is dead. Once more, we get a test of faith with the people that Jesus loved. You see, the faith walk, the Christian walk, it's not an easy walk, friends. It's not all flowers. It's not all candy. It's difficult. You're going to be confronted with difficult situations every step of the way. And in most cases, they come directly from your family. So, why is this even more difficult? Well, look at the highlights that Jesus and the disciples bring into the issue. Not only is Lazarus dead, but now we also have a danger zone in Judea. We also have a highlight of the place where Jesus was going that is also very dangerous. What did they say in verse 8? You want to go back? You know that they want to kill you there, right? In verse 8, they stress this emphasis of stoning Jesus. Look, Jesus, if you go back, like you left that place and you got them upset. You know, He healed the deaf man, and then he tells everyone that He is the Father, that He is God. They wanted to stone Him to death. And the disciples are like, just lay low. You know, just avoid going back to Judea. There was a conflict of the location, a danger zone where Jesus' ministry was not accepted. But interestingly enough, verse 18 highlights a wonderful city. What is the first name? What is the first word we read in verse 18? It says, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. So here we have the city of Bethany in Judea. So this is the region. So this is about 2 miles away from Bethany. 2 miles is like from here to Harlem. If you know the streets around Cicero, it's relatively close. You can walk there within 25 to 30 minutes, depending on how fast you can walk. So this was also within Judea. But in Bethany, we have this kind of contradiction within itself. The people in Judea hated Jesus, but there was this one home in Bethany that also provided a network of homes. This home in Bethany was the place where Jesus would often go to relieve Himself from the pressures of ministry. He would go to that place to rest. He would go to Bethany in the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus to sleep and to eat. Even after violent encounters, the networks would come out forward, like in Matthew chapter 21, and He would go and rest in those places. He would even sleep in the house of Simon the leper in Matthew chapter 26, verse 6. So this house began to do a little network of homes around Judea that actually accepted Christ. So even within a dangerous location, there were people that accepted Christ. What are the theological implications here? We can see them in verses 7 through 10. So these verses at the beginning, 1 through 15 and 17 and 23, what we've been explaining is the issues, the problems, the concerns. But what are the theological implications here? And the good thing is that I don't even have to bring them out. Jesus brings out the theological implication for himself. Go back to verse 7 through 10. We'll read it together. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." Again, isn't this a familiar theme in the Gospel of John? Light and darkness, sun or day and night. What Jesus is doing here is showing that this development or this theme that is development between light and dark is still part of Jesus' ministry to go to those dark places. You and I know where to avoid in the city, right? We know where not to go in, especially after dark. It was funny for me to hear recently, a friend of mine told me that he knew of someone that didn't want to come to Cicero. They didn't want to come to, or they weren't allowed to come to Cicero because they were afraid. They said, "Where are you going?" "To Cicero." "No, don't go to Cicero, especially on the weekend. You want to avoid Cicero." And I'm like, man, are we really that bad? Are we really that scary? But anyway, we within ourselves know where not to go. You wouldn't let your kids out at night in certain parts of Chicago, in certain parts of the city. It's just natural for us to know these danger zones. However, the theological implication again highlights Jesus' human nature. Jesus was willing to return to Jerusalem, the darkness, to demonstrate his desire to shed light. He is the light of the world after all, right? And so this light needs to go even in the darkest places. Because even in the darkest places, Jesus could do the greatest miracles. And so his desire was there. There was people in Jerusalem still that needed to come to faith. And so this light, Jesus emphasizes, is the light that will guide their path. That's why he highlights the 12 hours, because he's kind of putting this understanding as a metaphor. Hey, there's only 12 hours in the day, right? So because there's only 12 hours in the day, we got to move and we have to work because the dark will come. And Jesus has already said this in the gospel. The moment will come when he will no longer be with the people. So this work, this spreading the gospel, this being a witness, as he said, I'm a witness to myself, and I bear witness to myself, has to be spread while there is still light. It is a general concern and a very loving response of somebody who, instead of saying, I ain't going there, you see how they reacted? You see how they responded? Let them go to hell. Jesus says, let's go back. We have work to do. Yeah, it's not easy. Yeah, maybe your family situation isn't easy to talk about faith in. Maybe your work, maybe the people that surround you around your neighborhood, or your neighbors, maybe it's not easy to shed light or spread the gospel, but it's never going to be easy, friends. You're never going to, maybe, but chances are that when you talk to somebody about Christ, they're not going to be like, oh, yeah, just tell me all about Christ. I want to know everything you know. It doesn't work. It generally doesn't work that way. It's usually like people roll their eyes and are like, oh, come on, bro. Right. We're in the middle of a party right now, brother. Come on. Like, can't this wait till later? Or can't you just send me a YouTube video? Or generally, people will not be receptive. But Thomas was like, hey, I'm down. Let's go. We'll go fight with you, Jesus. He was anxious at the beginning, but when it came down to it, he didn't even believe. But the timing is crucial. And Jesus will later speak of Jerusalem, and he will say in Luke chapter 19, verse 44, you did not know the time of your visitation. Sadly, this same concept will be repeated in our time. Many of us, Jesus will weep over and say, sadly, you didn't realize the time of your visitation. Because as you know, as I know, many people still reject Jesus. Jesus is still rejected. Even though he is a good guy, Jesus is still rejected as a Savior because a lot of people don't understand that they walk in darkness. So friends, as Jesus says it here, there's still time in the day to come to Christ. The fact that you're here this morning proves once more that there is grace over us, as Paul says in Romans. God is still patient with sinners and calls sinners to repentance in moments just like this. What's the solution? The solution comes by way of the sisters. There was the problem. The problem was Lazarus is sick and now he's dead. The problem was that it took place in a place that hated Jesus and wanted to kill him. How are they going to solve this issue? Well, the sisters run out to meet Jesus, and as they themselves sent for him, they believed he could save him. And in verse 20, we see Mary and Martha could only believe in Christ to solve the problem. They both run out quickly to him. Martha goes out first in verse 20, and the story of Mary going out to see Jesus also is reflected in verse 28 through 32. They quickly went to go see Jesus because they believed he could have done something of the sort. And in verse 37, the Jews also believed that Jesus could have saved them. Look at what verse 37 says. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? Like even the Jews that were not even following Jesus, or that Jesus didn't love per se, believed that Jesus could have healed him. The solution was found in Jesus. But Jesus shows why he is the true solution. It isn't a pre-solution to save someone from their sickness. It is someone who could raise the dead. Why? Here's the answer in verse 23 through 26. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Jesus clarifies her theological understanding, right? Martha was like, yeah, Jesus, I know we're going to raise, you're going to raise the dead later. That's later though. I understand that. You taught us that. Jesus says, no, woman, you don't understand. I am the resurrection and the life. And he's telling her not only of the physical implication of what he's about to do, he's teaching her of what he will do for all eternity. So when Martha went to call Mary, she told her what? I love this in verse 28. She says, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. I love that. What doesn't she say? She doesn't tell Mary, hey, the miracle worker is here. The guy who could heal is here. She had just been taught a lesson of eternal life, and she emphasizes that lesson with Jesus' teaching ministry, because Jesus doesn't just want to heal people, friends. Jesus just doesn't want to do miracles. He wants to teach what it means to live in the resurrection, in the one who is the resurrection and the life. And so she calls for Mary, and she tells her, the teacher is here, and he wants to teach you as well. So as Jesus taught Martha the most important lesson of her life, he does so by using one of the I am statements that we have so profoundly studied throughout all of these chapters. Jesus has said, I am the bread of life. So he's not simply a bread giver. He is the bread of life. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He is not only a way to see, he is light, and only in him can one see. Jesus also said what we learned in chapter 10, I am the good shepherd. He's not only here to defend and mend our physical needs, but he's here to guide us into true life in Jesus Christ. All these statements proved his identity. And it was all wrapped around this eternal dimension that dealt with eternal consequences. That's why your answer to who Jesus is better be one that has an eternal dimension. It isn't Jesus is the guy we learn about on Sunday mornings. Jesus is the good guy that heals people. We've been learning that he heals. Jesus is nice and he loves me. Jesus is what he says to Martha, the resurrection and the life. What does that mean? Everyone will die. Physically. Everyone is dead spiritually until Jesus provides life. That, my friends, is what the teacher wants to teach this morning. For what purpose? What's the purpose in all of this? Have you noticed that we haven't even gotten to the miracle? Jesus, up until all these 40 verses before the actual miracle takes place, is all a teaching. This is development. This is a process of why isn't the story just like, and Jesus went to Lazarus and he said, Lazarus, come out of the tomb and the stone, and there was an earthquake, and then this man comes out and Jesus goes in and he takes off his robes and he makes him alive and he flies away to heaven. Like, it's none of that. It's all a prelude of teaching. For what purpose? Why is Jesus saying all of this, and why does he ultimately do the miracle? Well, we go back to verse 4. What is the purpose of this? The illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God. Say that with me. For the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. What is Jesus doing in all of this? He's showing God's glory, His powerful work, ultimately in the glorification of Jesus Christ. The glory of God would come by way of God's powerful display. It will reveal that God is powerful when Jesus actually does the miracle. What does Jesus mean by this glorification of Himself? Well, Jesus isn't just saying, wow, people are going to clap and say, Jesus, and hats off to you. You healed the deaf guy, you've healed the blind guy, you turned water into wine, but this is legit, Jesus. Round of applause, I believe. No. That is not what Jesus means about His glorification. Jesus means that He will be glorified to do exactly this in everyone's spiritual life. He will be glorified because after chapter 11, all the Jews will plot out His murder. Chapter 12 and on is the reaction to this stunning event. And they will plot out His death. They will seek to murder Jesus even after He did such wonderful act. And even in John chapter 12, verse 23, the next chapter, He says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. He's talking about the cross. Jesus operates over Lazarus, knowing full well that his glorification will come when everyone will see him on that cross. And it is there where he will prove that he is the resurrection and the life. Why does he do it? Well, he does it with his disciples. He does this to show the glory of God. In verse 15 we read that he did it for his disciples so that they may believe. And so when Jesus raises Lazarus from the grave, he ultimately does so to incite and to grow their faith. And when he does so, even the gospel witness of those that doubted at the beginning are beginning to give testimony of Jesus. This was another opportunity for Jesus to prove who he was again. If they didn't believe the water to wine, if they didn't believe the walking on water, if they didn't believe the turning the bread, the two fish and the two bread, if he didn't believe in that miracle, then they would definitely have to see this sign and show and prove that God was with them. So this was Jesus again doing something spectacular, not to show off, but to prove who he was so that they would come to have faith in him. And in verse 45 and later in chapter 12, verse 11, many began to testify about Jesus because of what he did. So what he wanted to do actually happened. Even in the place that wanted to kill Jesus, many began to believe and testify about them. So much that the Jewish leaders were trying to shut people off and telling them to shut up about Jesus. We'll see this later on in the book of Acts, where the Jewish authorities would tell the apostles, stop talking about Jesus. Stop it. Peter and John would reply, we just can't stop preaching about Jesus Christ. And then he asks Martha, again, why is this the purpose? Why does Jesus do this? He asks Martha the most important question of her life. Do you believe? Now again, doesn't Martha already believe? Didn't Martha and her sister Mary call Jesus in the first place? Well, this was Jesus again strengthening her faith. She may have known his power, but now she definitely knows his messiahship is here. Jesus clarifies, I'll doubt. And then she responds in verse 27, yes, Lord, I believe that you are not the healer, not the miracle worker, the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world. Earlier, she had a theological response. In this response, she just said, you are the Christ. You are the Son of God. Mary and Martha had faith in Jesus from the beginning, but now all doubts are cleared. They will stand at the cross with him. Martha hesitated to roll away the stone, but Jesus proves to her that not even the days or the odor would stop from this important work in Lazarus' life. And then we get to this final aspect. Look at what verse 43 says. When he had said these things, he cried out loud with a voice, Lazarus, come out! I love that. 42 verses of teaching, basically. 42 verses of kind of digging through the problems and the solutions and trying to figure this out, and all the like the drama is building up, all so that Jesus says a couple of words. Lazarus, come out. It's like so much anticipation for this wonderful miracle, and it only takes 3 words to get Lazarus to come out. But what does that mean? Again, Jesus is powerful enough to raise the dead. And friends, this is not a myth on Mythbusters. This is a true, authenticated story. And it is Jesus the one who will show he has power over death. That's why the Corinthians will hear Paul say, oh, death, quoting from Hosea, oh, death, where is your sting? Because even Jesus Christ has power over death. And that seems to be a big deal nowadays during this pandemic. Everyone is afraid of death. Everyone seeks to prevent the inevitable. And Jesus has power over death. So sometimes we put more of our confidence in everything that the medical world gives us. We forget that Jesus is in control of life and death. 2 commands. Come out. And in verse 44 he says, unbind him. Why does he tell the people to unbind him? Well, they were not only going to witness the power of God, they were also going to partake in the ministry and do the unbinding for Lazarus. So now they will live forever as witnesses of this glorious Jesus Christ. So much more, my friends, of this wonderful story, but I just wanted to highlight to you the wonderful human aspect of Jesus Christ that cared so much for his own that he sought to give them the most undeniable sign so that they may still have time to come to him. And so with that, just know today is another way that Jesus shows his love for his people by giving you this time of grace to come to Christ. Do it while there's still 12 hours in the day, because there will come a day or a moment where there is darkness, and you will have that opportunity no more. But if Jesus rose Lazarus from the dead, friends, he could do it to you. Why don't we stand up this morning?